Hello, welcome to my class. I am Pamela Jasmine. Today I am going to teach a poem after Blenheim written by the great romantic poet Robert Southey. This poem is an anti-war poem written in the form of a ballad. What is ballad? Ballad is a long narrative poem that tells a story. After Blenheim narrates the story of Caspar, an old farmer, and his two grandchildren engaged in a conversation about the famous battle that took place in Blenheim. This poem depicts a common man's ignorance of the motives of war. Let's discuss the poem. It was a summer evening. Old Caspar's work was done, and he before his cottage door was sitting in the sun. And by him spotted on the green his little grandchild Wilhelmine. So it was a summer evening, and old Caspar has finished all his work and he was relaxing in front of his cottage. He was sitting in the sun and he could see his grandchild playing in the field. His grandchild's name was Wilhelmine. She saw her brother Peterkin roll something large and round, which he beside the rivulet in playing there had found. He came to ask what he had found that was so large and smooth and round. So Wilhelmine was playing in the field, and she saw her brother Peterkin found something large and round when he was playing beside a rivulet. Rivulet means a small river or a stream. Peterkin was playing by the side of the small river, and while he was playing, he found a large, round, smooth thing. And he rolled that and he brought it in front of Caspar. He came to ask what he had found that was so large and smooth and round. He came to ask old Caspar what he had found, which was large, smooth and round. Old Caspar took it from the boy who stood expectant by, and then the old man shook his head and with a natural sigh, "It's some poor fellow's skull," said he, "who fell in the great victory." So old Caspar took that round, smooth thing in his hand, and the boy was standing beside him expectant. That means he was very curious and he was expecting a proper answer from his grandfather. And then the old man shook his head and with a natural sigh. So the old man, Caspar, shook his head with a sigh. He sighed and he said, "It is some poor fellow's skull." So this round, smooth thing was the skull of an old fellow's skull. So it is some poor fellow's skull, said he, who fell in the great victory. So it was the skull of a poor fellow who fell dead in the victory. That means in the war. "I find them in the garden, for there is many hereabout, and often when I go to plough, the ploughshare turns them out." Then the old man was describing. He had found so many skulls like this when he ploughed his land. "I find them in the garden, for there is many hereabout." He could find many skulls like that in the garden when he plowed the land. "The ploughshare turns them out." When he plowed the land, the ploughshare turned it out. "For many thousand men," said he, "were slain in that great victory." So many thousands of people were slain, thousands of people were killed in that great victory. He was mentioning the war like this only, the great victory. "Now tell us what it was all about, young Peterkin," he cries, and little Wilhelmine looks up with wonder-waiting eyes. "Now tell us all about the war and what they fought each other for." Now the children wanted to know the details of the war. Wilhelmine was looking at her grandfather with wonder waiting eyes. That means she was expecting some exciting answer from her grandfather. Now tell us what it was all about, young Peterkin, he cries. The young Peterkin asked, why? See, you just tell everything about war. And little Wilhelmine looks up with wonder waiting eyes. She was waiting, she was looking up at her grandfather to get a proper answer, to get some exciting answer. Now tell us all about the war and what they fought each other for. They wanted to know everything, all the details of the war, and they wanted to know the reason. Why did they fight with each other? It was the English, Caspar cried, who put the French to rout. But what they fought each other for, I could not well make out. But everybody said, quoth he, that it was a famous victory. It was the English. Caspar was answering that it was a war fought between the English and the French. It was the English, Caspar cried, who put the French to rout. Rout means defeat. So, it was the English who defeated the French. But what they fought each other for, I could not well make out. But he did not know why, what for they fought. Why did they fight? That even Caspar, old Caspar, did not know. Why did they fight? The reason of their fight, the reason of the battle was unknown to Caspar. But everybody said, quoth he, that it was a famous victory. But everybody said that it was a famous victory. He knew nothing about the cause of the war, but he knew that it was a famous victory. People were only talking about the victory, and they did not know the cause of the war. My father lived at Blenheim then, yon little stream hard by. They burned his dwelling to the ground, and he was forced to fly. So with his wife and child he fled, nor had he where to rest his head. So he was describing his own story. His father lived at Blenheim then. That means at that time when the war took place, his father and his mother and himself were staying in Blenheim. Yon little stream hard by, they were staying near, very near to a stream. They burned his dwelling to the ground, and he was forced to fly. So with his wife and child he fled, nor had he where to rest his head. They burnt his dwelling, they burnt his house to the ground. That means nothing was remaining. His entire house was burnt by the enemies, and he was forced to fly. So his father, Caspar's father, was forced to run away from there with his wife and child. So with his wife and child he fled. His father, Caspar's father, ran away from there, from Blenheim, with his wife and child. That child was Caspar. Nor had he where to rest his head. Then he was, at that time, they burnt his house, and he did not have a place to take shelter. With fire and sword the country round was wasted far and wide, and many a childing mother then and newborn baby died. But things like that, must be at every famous victory. So, with fire and sword the country round was wasted far and wide. Then people were running here and there in the country with fire and sword. So many killing, so many bloodshed, and many a childing mother then and newborn baby died. So many pregnant ladies and newborn babies died in that war. It was a very cruel war, and so many people lost their lives, and so many were injured, including pregnant women and small children. But things like that, must at every famous victory. But Caspar was telling in a casual way that it is very common when a famous victory is there. That means in a battle, it is very common. They say it was a shocking sight after the field was won. For many thousand bodies here lay rotting in the sun. But things like that, must be after a famous victory. People say that it was a shocking sight. It was after a battle, the battlefield is a shocking sight. They say it was a shocking sight after the field was won. So the one side won the battle. English won and France was defeated. So after the battle was won, they said that it was a horrifying sight. It was a shocking sight. For many thousands bodies here lay rotting in the sun. So many dead bodies were lying rotting in the sun. Nobody was there to bury them, bury the bodies. So many bodies lay rotting in the sun. But things like that, must be after a famous victory. But such things are very common according to Caspar after a famous victory. After a battle was fought, things like that are very common. Great praise the Duke of Marlborough won, and our good Prince Eugene. Why, it was a very wicked thing, said little Wilhelmine. Nay, nay, my little girl, quoth he, it was a famous victory. So here Duke of Marlborough, he was the British general, English general, commander of the British force. And our good Prince Eugene, he was the general, Austrian general. Young Prince Eugene was the general, Austrian general, but he was born in France, but he fought for the British. And with Marlborough, with the Duke of Marlborough, Eugene and Marlborough, they both fought for English and they won the war. And they were appreciated by everyone. They received great praise. Why, it was a very wicked thing, said little Wilhelmine. But little Wilhelmine, that small girl, said that it was a wicked thing because children are very innocent. They would tell the fact. And nay, nay, my little girl, quoth he, it was a famous victory. But Caspar was telling that, no, don't tell like that. It was a famous victory. Caspar himself was a victim of war and he had to flee from Blenheim with his family. His father flee from Blenheim with his wife and Caspar when he was very small. And everybody praised the Duke who this great fight did win. But what good came of it at last, quoth little Peterkin. Why, that I cannot tell, said he, but it was a famous victory. Even though he was a victim, he was praising the victory of that war. So, and everybody praised the Duke who this great fight did win. So, Caspar was telling everybody praised the Duke and the Prince for the great victory. But what good came on it at last, quoth little Peterkin. Then the small child asked, what good did they receive after this war? What was the result? So many people died and so many people injured. But what good did they attain? What they got from this war? Why, that I cannot tell, said he, but it was a famous victory. Then Caspar could not tell that. What did they win? What did they get? What good they received? That I cannot tell, but he can tell that it was a great victory. It was a famous victory. That's all about the poem. Now let's discuss the poetic devices. Themes. Main theme is the man's cruelty to man. So here this poem is an anti-war poem. Here man is killing man for achieving great victory. So here we can see the skull as a silent testimony, silent witness to the horrors of war. Here children are very innocent and they are asking, what did they get what good they received after the victory. But the old man, Caspar, was glorifying war and describing the great and famous victory. And now, curiosity and lack of it, that's the second theme. Children are very curious to know the details and the cause of war and what are the results and the outcome of war. At the same time, old Caspar, he was talking only about the victory, where it was fought and between whom it was fought. But he did not know why the war was fought. What was the reason? So here we can see curiosity from the side of children and lack of it by this old man Caspar. Third theme, complacency. What is complacency? Complacency is the uncritical appreciation or satisfaction for one's achievement. Here, Caspar knows about the destruction and bloodshed of war. He himself was a victim, but still he was taking it as a common factor of war. It is very common in the victory of a battle. That's what he feels. But children are questioning, or children are talking about the horrors of war, and they were asking what did they get after the success. But still Caspar was telling it was a great victory, it was a famous victory. Now see the refrain. Refrain means one line is repeated at the end of a stanza. Here we can see the line. So here great victory and famous victory, like that. Famous victory, great victory, these words are repeated by the end of each and every stanza. We can see alliteration in this poem. Let's take this stanza. Now tell us what it was all about. T is repeated. Tell, twas, then Peterkin, T, and again little Wilhelmine looks. So L is repeated. Then again with wonder waiting eyes, W is repeated. So in this poem we can see alliteration. So Southey uses alliteration to promote rhythm. So here we can see alliteration in many places. Repetition. The idea of victory is repeated through famous victory, great victory. We can see almost all the stanzas. By the end of all the stanzas, these lines are repeated. The idea of victory. So put the French to rout. That is the victory. Idea of victory. English won and French was defeated. Irony. After Blenheim is an anti-war poem which describes the horrors of war, like burning of houses, casualties of pregnant women and small children and decaying corpses, etc. But at the same time, see, Caspar himself describes the horrors of war like this. But he himself describes the glory of war. The outcome of war is glorified by Caspar himself, like famous victory, great victory, etc. But Caspar is finding these casualties as common of such glorious or such battles, great battles. So we can conclude that the cost of this great victory is death and destruction. So that's all about this poem. If you like this poem, please like and share and subscribe. Thank you for watching. God bless.